Lynne is the principal of Park High School, and if you've sat in a meeting with Lynne, you hear her talk about a lot of different topics that are beyond what's just going on in Park High School. Oh, and in this section, for all of you that are going to come up, you're welcome to go back to your chair, or you can sit here. And then at the end, we're going to bring you guys all up for a Q&A.
Thanks for being here. For my first 5 minutes, I'd like to talk a little bit about situations that have to do with students who find themselves homeless, and then I'd like to take another 5 minutes to talk about the intersection of lack of affordable housing with financial stress and financial insecurity and the toll that takes on children and families in our community. In 2015-16, last school year, at Park High School, we had 21 students who, at some point during the year, were homeless. It was about 5%, nearly 5% of our population. Of those 21 students that year, 6 dropped out despite notable assistance and effort by school personnel and youth-serving agencies and people. Another 4 ran afoul of the law, and tragically 2 died. Schools are governed by a federal law. It's called the McKinney-Vento Act, first enacted in 1987, to address not only homelessness of families with children, but also to address other groups, as Tracy talked about, handicapped, elderly, Native Americans, and so on. The goal of the act with respect to children has to do with trying to get kids into school quickly, so sometimes without the required paperwork, and then hooking them up with assistance with food, supplies, that sort of thing. And then attempting to keep them in school if they lose their housing. So if a mom whose children are in Livingston goes into shelter in Bozeman, then the Bozeman School District and the Livingston School District have to figure out how to transport those kids back and forth. Homeless children are defined as kids who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And so examples of kids that I've seen in the Livingston School District who fall under this definition are those families who double up, as Tracy talked about. For example, they move in with their grandparents due to economic hardship or loss of housing. It's children who are living in motels or campers or sheds or barns because of, or some other sort of substandard accommodation because of lack of alternative accommodations. It's children whose primary nighttime residence isn't a place where you would normally sleep. So, for example, in a car or under the bridge or in somebody's living room on the couch. A year or so ago, while I was conducting research around family, community, and school influences as students transitioned out of Park High School, I talked with a young man who had struggled and ended up leaving high school before graduating. He described how his mom gave up on him for a while and, quote, "And my stepdad and I did not see eye to eye very well, so I pretty much moved out and lived by myself and wherever I could stay." He talked about couch surfing and living in his old pickup truck with his dog up on the hill by the P. And so it was impossible for him to keep track of any sort of schoolwork. High school kids who leave home due to alcohol and drug abuse in their families is not uncommon. As a school system, while we attempt to be accurate, we believe that our homeless numbers are really underreported. We currently have 31 students we're aware of who are homeless in our school district. That's about 2% of our enrollment. About half of those students are from the high school, and when I looked at the list this weekend, I could immediately name another 5 who aren't on the list. People who come to register their kids don't walk up and say, I'm homeless or my living situation is precarious. While we attempt to broach the subject by using the term families in transition in order to help preserve some sort of dignity, people don't want to share that sort of information. They're not going to call us up and say, hey, my home's been foreclosed on and I don't have the money to pay rent. They don't want us thinking that they can't take care of their kids, understandably. We usually find out about a homeless situation at the high school because somebody has a meltdown, or at the elementary school because a teacher notices that a child is unwashed or their clothes are dirty because their water's been turned off for some time now. While we do have access to a small amount of federal aid, and we get better all the time as a community in providing triage, as I looked at that list of homeless students at the high school, I have grave concerns about their safety, not to mention their physical and mental health, and not to mention getting them to the high school graduation line ready for college and career. In my last couple of minutes, I'd just like to add a bit to this discussion about affordable housing with a conceptualization that continues to form for me. In 2013 in Livingston, 21% of the children who lived here were below age 18. 13 to 15% of the population, as Peter pointed out, lived below the poverty line. But nearly 50% of the children in the Livingston School District qualify for free and reduced meals. So half of the children who are in school are living about 185% of the federal poverty rate, and so that's a paycheck or two away from poverty. And the lack of financial means and the financial insecurity that this has on families should not be understated at all. In the research study I mentioned earlier, I was comparing 2 generations of Park High alumni from working class families. And the study originated for me because I was trying to understand why, when 80% of our students were saying they wanted to go on to some sort of post-secondary education or training, why was only 35 to 40% getting there in the year and a half after high school graduation? One of the findings, and a startling discovery for me, was just understanding how this financial stress and financial insecurity weighs really heavily on this generation of high school students. It is even of a greater magnitude than it was in the generation that came to adulthood after the Burlington Northern pulled out in 1985. Here's a comment from a woman in the class of 2008. My parents fought a lot through high school, and a lot of that was financial. We knew it was financial. We heard the arguments, the fights, and it always started with money. Another about financial insecurity from a young man from the class of 2013. There was a point where some mortgage company called us, and they were going to take our house away, but the old man got a lawyer and got it all situated, and we were able to keep our house. This present generation from working class families who not so incidentally call themselves middle class is having difficulty seeing their way to post-secondary education and training because of their family's financial means and insecurity and the fear of indebtedness or underemployment that might await them should they attempt to pursue a college degree. My purpose for bringing this up in this discussion on affordable housing is because affordable housing and a family's income, as Tracy talked about, goes hand in hand. One arm of the work that our superintendent and our school board is doing in the Livingston School District, and they've been engaged in the past year and will unveil in the fall, one arm has to do with education for economic development in order to grow our community with jobs that provide a secure and a steady and a livable wage so that people can support themselves. This work dovetails beautifully with what we're doing at the high school in what we call internal redesign, and this is having to do with connecting learning with career pathways for kids at an earlier age. My second reason for bringing this up is a little bit harder to articulate in a brief talk, but last year as a community, whether you knew the individuals or not, we were all touched by 6 deaths in 7 months. 5 of these deaths were by suicide, 1 was alcohol related. All were age-wise in the prime of their lives. And while we know that suicide is complex, we also know that the pain and the hopelessness that results in the moment of taking one's life is real. We also know that it's impossible to extricate a person from their surrounds and their situation. Addressing affordable housing is addressing the many who either live in poverty or close to poverty. To solve this, as Tracy and Steve, as you started to talk about this, I believe we need a socioeconomic transformation that values the good of the all. Having decent work and a decent place to come home to will go a long ways in raising children who might have a sense of dignity and of hope that they might have an engaging, fulfilling life and perhaps meaningful work. And so this is really ethical, action-oriented work, and I thank you all for being here also. Thank you.